lobsters and could hold the key to where this probe ends. That's later tonight. We begin now, though, with our top story on the expanding Trump-era scandal, or set of scandals, at the DOJ. This particular one is new and has receipts. New emails from Donald Trump's own Oval Office trying to desperately overturn his 2020 laws and undercut American democracy as we know it. Now, in business and politics, it's pretty well known that Trump avoids email. He has no known personal email account, unlike, well, most people. But it turns out he does send some emails his own way, apparently through his staff, but with a pretty clear subject line, quote, from POTUS. And in the U.S. government, if an email like that comes in from the White House, you best believe it gets people's attention. This particular from POTUS email came after Trump's election loss, minutes before Trump was announcing Barr was stepping down, when he was still demanding the government find some way to keep him in power despite being the loser of the election. So that email fed a bogus report about the Michigan loss to DOJ. What we have in this story is more of Trump's plotting being basically caught, busted in writing. He wanted the DOJ to act as what would have been potentially an illegal arm of his re-election campaign after its loss. Now, Barr's replacement was a fairly obscure attorney, acting AG Jeffrey Rosen. Now, he reportedly resisted many Trump demands in that high-stakes period leading up to the insurrection, when Donald Trump was showing how serious he was about trying to stop the peaceful transfer of power in America. Another email says that Trump asked staff to, quote, send a draft document for review at the DOJ. Now, that review document, well, it was the White House trying to ghostwrite a brief for the Supreme Court to, again, overturn the election results that made Trump the loser. Now, we don't have any indication that Trump wrote the underlying legal brief. Indeed, it was much longer than a tweet storm, which undercuts the theory that Trump wrote it himself. But the new evidence shows how hands-on Donald Trump was in this multi-pronged effort to steal the election. And that plot includes some legal but anti-democratic ingredients, like shaking down those state county commissioners who were supposed to count the votes, or the bizarre Rudy Giuliani press conferences, distasteful but legal. But it also includes demands to commit crimes, which others simply resisted. We're hearing more and more stories out of the Justice Department of the things that Trump demanded that staff just wouldn't do. It also includes the crimes ultimately committed by other people on behalf of Donald Trump, like so much of what we saw and what's been indicted at the insurrection. And it also includes a question that now hangs over the unusual end to an unusual presidency, and that, as we've covered, poses questions for the current DOJ and the current Biden administration, no matter how much they want to move on. The question is, will investigators ultimately find that Donald Trump crossed criminal lines into committing election crimes himself?
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
Donald Trump's demands to find him votes is actually now under criminal investigation in Georgia. Now, any fair investigation will weigh all of the evidence, regardless of one's feelings about the person or their politics. It doesn't just weigh one statement or action. But that's what's bad news for Trump, and what the Biden administration increasingly sees that it can't just move on from if we're going to have an accountable democracy in this nation. The mounting stories from the Trump White House add to the evidence against Donald Trump. They raise questions about whether the man tweeting stopped the steal, back when he was allowed to tweet. The question of whether he was engaging in enough concrete actions with the requisite mental intent to cross the criminal legal line of trying to steal votes himself. I'm joined now tonight on this story by Cornell Belcher, the former Obama pollster and MSNBC analyst, and Joan Walsh from The Nation magazine. Joan, I put it that way because this is serious stuff that you can't just walk away from if you think it was that bad. If you don't, and the evidence cuts the other way, and it was just sore loserdom and being just a really nasty person, but not a criminal, fine. When you look at the mounting evidence, particularly what we're seeing in the man who we were told never sends emails, quote unquote, what do you see?
Oh, I see a lot, and I see a lot that we have to get to the bottom of. You know, this is not just an isolated phone call with the Georgia Secretary of State. This is a multi-pronged assault. We've got Mark Meadows as chief of staff going to bat, embarrassing himself in these emails. And, you know, I mean, I'm glad we've got these email records. They almost read as though they were written for public consumption down the road. They are so clear in their horror. These two DOJ people who wind up, you know, minding the store when Bill Barr leaves, trying not to do what the president wants or what Mark Meadows is telling them, or trying not. There are several funny ones because we all think Giuliani is a cartoonish villain about, you know, no, I'm not talking to Giuliani, no, you know, so they put up a good fight as far as we know, but we don't know what else was done. And, you know, one villain here clearly is Bill Barr, because, okay, he resigned rather than do some of these things, I guess, that's the story, but he didn't resign and blow any whistles we know about, nor did these two men who are exchanging these increasingly alarmist emails. And so there's so much, and I really wonder, I have great respect for Merrick Garland, I can't really sit here and second guess him, but I really think there has to be such a deep look at what was going on in that Justice Department, because obviously, I'm sure we're going to go on and talk about, I don't know that this is tied to the investigation, the subpoenas of journalists, which go back several years. I don't know if it's tied to the subpoenas of data from two Democratic Congress people and their staff. I don't know if it's tied to subpoenas of White House counsel Don McGahn's data records. We don't know. But we're just being bombarded by issues of obvious wrongdoing by that Justice Department. And I don't know that anybody, to my mind, has been ambitious enough in saying this is how we're getting to the bottom of it.
I think everything you just said makes sense. I hope people are listening, Joan. I mean, Cornell, to Joan's point, when the authoritarianism creeps out from under the rug, and out from the White House and out into the steps of the Capitol, it's not enough to just deal with it in isolation, because the world is watching and the next generation is watching and the politicians are watching over what you can get away with or not. And I want to be very clear to viewers. I always try to explain what I don't know. I don't know yet because we haven't had the investigation, what everyone was doing at DOJ during these times, those critical period. I do know, Cornell, that those individuals, including Mr. Rosen, were not pro-fridge. I do know that they did not stand up and use the power they had with an outgoing president who they knew was leaving power when they had an obligation of fidelity to their oath of office in the Constitution to just publicly say the election's over. There will be no more filings before the Supreme Court because there's no legal basis for that. And your job at DOJ is to say that, not just say what the president wants. Internally, to Joan's point, they may have been backing themselves up, which is lawyerly rather than courageous. I say that as a lawyer, so I'm a little bit of self-diss too. I've never been known for my courage, Cornell, but very lawyerly and yet telling. This was one quote for you, Cornell. Rosen forwarding what Joan alluded to, Trump's chief of staff saying maybe Italian satellites were manipulating votes, and the acting deputy AG, who's got a big job, acting number 2, says, quote, pure insanity, Cornell.
I don't know how you start with that. But to your point, we're not exactly sure. However, look, all right, at some point you see enough smoke, you know there's got to be some fire there. And the idea of them weaponizing the DOJ to try to be a political arm for Donald Trump, it shouldn't just alarm Democrats, but it should alarm everyone in America, right? It's undermining our democratic principles. I think this is the constitutional crisis stuff, right? You know, I think we've been talking a lot about the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the People Act being stalled in the Senate. But the truth of the matter is, Ari, I'm afraid that neither one of these laws, quite frankly, would stop or get in the way of this sort of culture of corruption coming from the White House. I think, you know, both the Senate and the House, they got to start thinking about looking at this level of corruption and imagining, you know, this is a level of corruption I don't think the founding fathers would even imagine taking place in the White House. So I think our lawmakers have to, if they want to, you know, protect our democracy, they've got to go further than the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. A lot of what we're focused on right now is stopping voter suppression. That's one thing. They've got to put put forward laws to sort of stop an outright steal and the executive office using its power to fraud an election, which, by the way, is mind-boggling because our founding, or your founding fathers, would have never imagined having to do that, but here we are.
Yeah, I hear you on all of that, and that's where the anti-democratic effort hits the racism that this country has to deal with. And so I want to keep both panelists, but give everyone this update. The other big story today, Biden administration has this new plan they're unveiling to deal with domestic terrorism, which includes one of the prime sources, white supremacists, a strategy that focuses on dealing with the direct violence, and $100 million now to fighting the problem.
In the FBI's view, the top domestic violent extremist threat comes from racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, specifically those who advocated for the superiority of the white race.
Cornell, there have been many shortcomings on the action. I will say, having knocked some of the other officials here, one thing I can say accurately is that going back from Mueller to Comey to Wray to now Garland, there has been factual agreement on the greater threat posed here by domestic white extremist groups than many of the other foreign and other types of threats that exist but are not as great. So factually, they've been able to say that. Whether that's been internalized in policy, whether Americans get that, or even after January 6th, is another matter. Cornell.
Well, let's be completely blunt here, all right? It has struggled to be internalized in policy because many of those right-wing nationalist extremists are the base of the Republican Party right now. They've been the base of Donald Trump's support. He is, in fact, who he called on, and that from the debate stage to stand by, right? So it's been terribly difficult for us to put forward a policy to check this threat to our country when one side of our political system, one party in our political system, sees them, quite frankly, more as allies than enemies to our democracy.
Yeah, Joan?
Right. Well, I hate to go back to ancient history, but the other part of this story that I can't ignore, Ari, and I know you both are familiar with this history, but, you know, President Obama's Homeland Security Department tried to warn about some of these same issues in 2010. Yep. And it was weaponized by the Republican Party, who claimed they were trying to criminalize anti-Obama dissent. And it was a political witch hunt. And that report that was written was shelved. The person who wrote it was fired or resigned, was left at any rate. And so we wasted at least 10 years. You know, I'm sure there were people looking at these things. I don't want to say nothing was done, but it wasn't a top priority. And of course, under Trump, it was anything but. But we Democrats got cowed 11 years ago on these issues, and it's good to see what Merrick Garland said today. But it feels late, and it feels like something we've known for a long time. So I continue to be alarmed by our inability to really grapple with this, and the fact that Republicans really are, many of them are encouraging it, and the others are too cowardly to actively discourage it. So we've got a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I'm not mad at the history lessons. Cornell went back all the way, 18th century. Yeah. Joan's given us the last 10, 15 years. Both relevant, because we could learn from those mistakes. Cornell and Joan, thanks to both of you for kicking us off tonight.
Thank you.
Appreciate you guys. We have a lot more in tonight's show. Giuliani, he's got an ally who's about to be in the criminal probe against him. We'll explain. But first, the special report I mentioned, there are new legal heavy hitters coming in to investigate Trump org, and they've gone after mobsters like Gotti and international bankers. There are clues here in one of the most consequential legal investigations in America today, and that's what we get into next.